I need you to look at something with me. I need you to really see it, because once you do, you'll never be able to unsee it. There's a photograph that has circulated on the internet for nearly 2 decades now. At first glance, it looks almost mundane. A farmhouse, clearly abandoned, its windows dark and hollow like the eye sockets of a skull. The paint is peeling. The structure is leaning. It's the kind of place you might drive past 1,000 times without giving it a second thought. But look closer. Look at what's in front of that house. A car. A 1985 Oldsmobile. Its rear end is backed directly into the front porch of this abandoned farmhouse, as if someone deliberately drove it into the building. The front of the car faces outward, toward the road, as though whoever put it there wanted to make sure they could leave quickly. Or perhaps they wanted to make sure someone else couldn't. That car belonged to a 17-year-old girl named Brianna Maitland. And on the night of March 19, 2004, in the small town of Montgomery, Vermont, she climbed into that vehicle after finishing her shift at a local restaurant and drove toward home. She never made it. What happened in those final minutes? What happened in that darkness between the place she left and the place she was going? Remains one of the most haunting mysteries in American history. I've spent months researching this case. I've read every police report that's been made public, every news article, every amateur theory posted on forums by people who simply cannot let Brianna go. And I'll tell you something right now. The more I learned, the less I understood. The more pieces of the puzzle I gathered, the more I realized that some of those pieces don't fit together at all. They can't, because someone has been lying. Someone has been hiding the truth for 20 years. And here's what keeps me awake at night. What made me know I had to tell you this story. Brianna Maitland could have been any of us. She could have been your daughter, your sister, your best friend. She was a teenager who made the ordinary choice to work a job, earn some money, and drive herself home. She did everything right. And still, the darkness found her. Now, I'm going to ask you something before we go any further. I'm going to ask you to do something that might feel uncomfortable, but it matters. If you're watching this, if you've made it this far, then Brianna's story has already touched you in some way. Share this video. Subscribe to this channel. Not for me. I don't care about numbers. But for Brianna, for her family, who has spent 2 decades begging the world not to forget their daughter. Every share puts her face in front of someone new. Every subscription means you'll be here when we uncover more cases like this, when we shine a light into the dark places that most people would rather ignore. Because here's the truth that haunts me. Someone out there knows what happened to Brianna Maitland. Someone has carried that secret for 20 years. They've gone to work, eaten dinner, watched television, celebrated holidays, all while a family weeps for answers. That person might see this video. They might finally feel the weight of what they've done pressing down on them until they can't breathe. Or someone who knows them might see this video and finally recognize the signs they've been ignoring. You could be the reason this case breaks open. You could be the reason a mother finally learns what happened to her child. So stay with me. Stay until the end. Because I promise you, by the time we're finished, you'll understand why this case has become an obsession for so many people. You'll understand why professional investigators and amateur sleuths alike have devoted years of their lives to finding Brianna. And you'll understand why, despite everything, I still believe in hope. Let me take you back now. Let me take you back to a place that probably looks a lot like wherever you grew up, a place where everyone knew everyone, where doors were left unlocked and children played outside until the streetlights came on. Let me take you to Montgomery, Vermont, in the early months of 2004, when the snow was still piled high and a girl named Brianna was just trying to figure out who she was going to become. Before Brianna Maitland became a photograph, before she became a case number, before she became a hashtag and a true crime podcast episode and a name whispered in worried tones by parents everywhere, she was a person. She was a daughter and a sister. She was a student. She was a teenager navigating all the messy, complicated, beautiful chaos that comes with being 17 years old. I want you to know her. Not just know about her, but actually know her, because that's what gets lost in cases like this. We become so focused on the mystery, so consumed by the questions and the theories and the dark speculation that we forget we're talking about a human being. A girl who laughed and cried and dreamed about her future. A girl who had inside jokes with her friends and favorite songs and little habits that drove her parents crazy in the way that all teenagers drive their parents crazy. Brianna Alexandra Maitland was born on October 8, 1986. She had dark hair and striking eyes that seemed to hold secrets even in the most casual photographs. People who knew her described her as artistic and creative, the kind of person who saw the world differently than most. She wrote poetry. She was interested in music. She had that quality that certain teenagers possess, a sense that she was somehow older than her years, that she was already thinking about things most people her age hadn't considered yet. But she was also, undeniably, a teenager. And like many teenagers, she was going through a period of testing boundaries and figuring out where she fit in the world. Her parents, Bruce and Kelly Maitland, loved her fiercely, but they also worried about her. That's what parents do. They worry. They see their children making choices they don't agree with, and they try to guide them. And sometimes they feel helpless when guidance isn't enough. In the months before her disappearance, Brianna had been going through what her family would later describe as a difficult period. She had dropped out of high school, though she'd earned her GED and was working toward enrolling in Job Corps to continue her education. She'd had some conflicts at home, the kind of conflicts that are painfully normal for families with teenagers, disagreements about curfews and friends and decisions, and all the million little battles that rage in homes across America every single night. She had moved out of her parents' house and was living with a friend in the nearby town of St. Albans. She was working 2 jobs, trying to establish her independence and prove to herself and everyone else that she could make it on her own. One of those jobs was at the Black Lantern Inn, a restaurant in Montgomery, Vermont. I need you to understand this place to understand this story. It's the kind of town that barely registers on most maps. Fewer than 1,000 people live there, tucked away in the Green Mountains near the Canadian border. The winters are brutal and beautiful, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes you appreciate the warmth of a fire and the company of neighbors. Everyone knows everyone. Strangers stand out like beacons. This is important. Remember this. In a town like Montgomery, in March of 2004, a stranger would have been noticed. An unfamiliar car would have raised eyebrows. Something out of place would have sparked conversation at the general store, at the post office, at church on Sunday. And yet somehow, something terrible happened to Brianna Maitland, and no one saw a thing. Or if they did, they've never told. The Black Lantern Inn sits in the heart of Montgomery, a charming establishment that serves as one of the social centers of this tiny community. Brianna had been working there for several months, waitressing and helping out wherever she was needed. Her co-workers would later describe her as dependable, friendly, the kind of person who showed up when she was scheduled and did her job without complaint. On the night of March 19, 2004, a Friday night, Brianna worked the evening shift at the Black Lantern. It was an ordinary shift on an ordinary night. She served customers, cleared tables, joked with the kitchen staff. Nothing seemed wrong. Nothing seemed different. She clocked out around 11:15 p.m. and walked out into the cold Vermont night. Her car, that 1985 Oldsmobile Cutlass, was waiting in the parking lot. She climbed inside, started the engine, and began the drive toward her friend's house in St. Albans. The route would take her along Route 118, a winding road that cuts through the mountains. At night, in winter, it's the kind of road where you grip the steering wheel a little tighter and watch for patches of ice. Brianna never made it to St. Albans. Somewhere along that dark road, something happened. Something that would leave her car abandoned at an old farmhouse. Something that would leave her family shattered. Something that would transform an ordinary Friday night into a nightmare that has never ended. The farmhouse on Route 118 had been abandoned for years. It sat about a mile from the Black Lantern Inn, a decaying monument to some family's forgotten history. The paint had long since faded from its wooden siding. The windows were either broken or clouded with decades of grime. The structure itself was leaning, slowly surrendering to gravity and time. The kind of place that children might dare each other to explore on summer afternoons, but would avoid entirely once darkness fell. Nobody lived there. Nobody had lived there for a long time. There was no reason for anyone to be at that farmhouse, especially not in the middle of the night, especially not in March when the temperature dropped well below freezing and the wind cut like a knife. On the morning of March 20th, 2004, a state trooper drove past the property as part of his regular patrol. What he saw made him slow down, then stop entirely. There was a car in front of the farmhouse, a dark-colored Oldsmobile. It wasn't parked normally. It wasn't pulled to the side of the road or positioned in what might have once been a driveway. No, this car had been backed directly into the front porch of the abandoned structure. The rear of the vehicle had actually pushed through some of the porch material, as if it had been driven with force, with intent. The trooper noted the vehicle but didn't investigate further. Perhaps he assumed it was an accident. Someone had lost control on the icy road and ended up in the porch. Perhaps he thought the driver had walked away to find help. Perhaps he was busy with other calls and planned to come back later. Whatever the reason, he drove on. This decision would haunt him. It would haunt everyone. The car sat there all day Saturday. It sat there Saturday night. It wasn't until Sunday that someone finally called police to report the abandoned vehicle, to ask why a car had been crashed into a building and left there for 2 days. By then, more than 36 hours had passed since Brianna Maitland was last seen alive. When investigators finally examined the scene, what they found raised far more questions than answers. The car had been backed into the porch with significant force. There was damage to both the vehicle and the structure. But the keys were not in the ignition. Brianna's personal belongings were scattered inside the car. Her paycheck from the Black Lantern, which she hadn't cashed, some of her clothing, various personal items. But there was no sign of Brianna herself. Outside the car, in the snow and mud, investigators found something that made their blood run cold. There were footprints, multiple sets of footprints, moving around the vehicle and toward the back of the farmhouse. And there was something else, something that suggested violence had occurred at this scene. Items that indicated a struggle. Items that I can't describe in detail out of respect for the investigation that remains open to this day, but items that made it clear Brianna did not simply walk away from her car voluntarily. The police began canvassing the area, knocking on doors, asking questions. Had anyone seen anything Friday night? Had anyone heard anything? A car crash? Voices? Screaming? The answers they received were maddeningly incomplete. A few people reported seeing headlights near the farmhouse late Friday night or early Saturday morning. One person thought they might have heard something, a noise, a commotion, but couldn't be certain. In a rural area like this, sounds carry strangely in the cold night air, bouncing off mountains and distorting in ways that make it nearly impossible to determine direction or distance. One witness would later tell investigators they had seen Brianna's car being followed by another vehicle as she left the Black Lantern in that night. A dark pickup truck, possibly. Or maybe an SUV. The witness couldn't be certain. It was dark. It was cold. They weren't paying close attention because why would they? It was just a girl leaving work. Nothing unusual about that. But if someone had followed Brianna from the restaurant, if someone had been watching her that night, waiting for her to finish her shift, then this wasn't a random crime. This was targeted. This was planned. This was someone who knew her, or at least knew of her, someone who had selected her specifically. The family was notified. Bruce and Kelly Maitland received the news that every parent dreads. Their daughter was missing, and the circumstances suggested something terrible had happened. They rushed to Montgomery, to the farmhouse, to the police station, desperate for information, desperate for hope. Kelly Maitland would later describe those first hours and days as a waking nightmare. "You keep thinking you're going to wake up," she said in one interview. "You keep thinking someone is going to call and say they made a mistake. She's fine. She was at a friend's house. She lost track of time." But that call never comes. And eventually you realize that the nightmare is real, and it's never going to end. As investigators dug deeper into Brianna Maitland's life, searching for some clue that might explain her disappearance, they began to uncover a complicated picture. The small-town innocence of Montgomery started to crack, revealing shadows that had been lurking just beneath the surface. Brianna, they learned, had been having problems at work. Not with her job performance. Everyone agreed she was a good worker, but with someone else. Another young woman who worked at the Black Lantern had allegedly been harassing Brianna, threatening her, making her life difficult. The conflict had escalated to the point where Brianna had reportedly been physically assaulted by this woman a few weeks before her disappearance. Here's where I need to pause and ask you something. And I really want you to think about this, to sit with it for a moment before you keep watching. When you were 17 years old, did you have conflicts with other teenagers? Did you have disagreements, arguments, even physical confrontations? Most of us did, in some form. It's part of growing up. But here's the question that haunts this case. How often do we dismiss teenage conflicts as drama or typical kid stuff? How often do we fail to take young people seriously when they tell us they're scared, when they tell us someone is threatening them? I want to know what you think. Leave a comment below. Tell me about a time when you or someone you knew wasn't taken seriously, when a warning sign was ignored because it came from a young person. How might things have been different if adults had listened? This matters, not just for this case, but for every young person out there right now who might be in danger and might be afraid no one will believe them. The woman who had allegedly been harassing Brianna was questioned by police. She denied any involvement in the disappearance. She had an alibi for the night in question. She said she was elsewhere, with other people who could vouch for her whereabouts. Investigators looked into her story and, at least initially, found no evidence that directly contradicted her claims. But the workplace conflict was just the beginning. As police continued their investigation, other troubling details emerged. There were whispers about drug activity in the area, not hard drugs, necessarily, but the kind of low-level dealing that sometimes occurs in economically depressed rural communities. Some of Brianna's acquaintances were allegedly involved in this world, and investigators had to consider whether she might have been caught up in something dangerous. There were also rumors about a party that had occurred near Montgomery around the time of Brianna's disappearance. Some witnesses claimed that Brianna had planned to attend this party after work, that she might have gone there before attempting to drive home. If true, this could explain why she was on Route 118 near the abandoned farmhouse. Perhaps she had been followed from the party, or perhaps something had happened at the party itself. Investigators pursued every lead, followed every thread, but the threads kept tangling and breaking. Witnesses contradicted each other. Timelines didn't match up. People who might have known something suddenly developed convenient cases of amnesia. It was as if an entire community had collectively decided to close ranks, to protect secrets that they valued more than justice for a missing girl. And then there was the matter of the abandoned farmhouse itself. Who owned it? Who had access to it? Investigators learned that the property had been in legal limbo for years, the subject of disputes and neglect. Anyone could have known about it. Anyone could have been using it for purposes they didn't want others to know about. The farmhouse's isolation made it an ideal location for all kinds of illicit activities, and potentially an ideal location for something far more sinister. One theory that emerged early and persisted throughout the investigation was that Brianna had been forced off the road deliberately. Someone had either flagged her down or rammed her vehicle, causing her to crash into the farmhouse porch. Then they had taken her. But why? For what purpose? And why had no one seen or heard anything definitive? Another theory suggested that Brianna had driven to the farmhouse voluntarily, perhaps to meet someone. Perhaps she had received a phone call or a message asking her to come to this location. Perhaps she had trusted the wrong person, had gotten into a car with someone she thought was a friend, and had learned too late that she had made a fatal error in judgment. The police brought in additional resources. State police coordinated with local law enforcement. The FBI was consulted. Search teams combed the woods around the farmhouse, looking for any sign of Brianna, any evidence that might point to what had happened. Dogs were brought in to track her scent. They picked up a trail leading from her car toward the back of the property, but the trail went cold. It was as if Brianna had simply vanished into the air. For months, the investigation into Brianna Maitland's disappearance seemed to spin in circles. Tips came in, were investigated, and led nowhere. Persons of interest were identified, questioned, and either cleared or left in frustrating ambiguity. The family held press conferences, begging anyone with information to come forward. They offered rewards. They printed flyers. They did everything in their power to keep their daughter's face in the public eye. And then, nearly a year after Brianna disappeared, something happened that no one expected. something that would fundamentally alter the direction of the investigation and raise questions that remain unanswered to this day. In early 2005, a woman came forward with a stunning claim. She told investigators that she had knowledge of what had happened to Brianna Maitland and that multiple people were involved in her disappearance. She provided names. She provided details. She described a scenario in which Brianna had been targeted because of a dispute, that she had been taken to a specific location, and that she had been killed. The woman's information was specific enough that investigators took it seriously. They began to look more closely at the individuals she had named. They discovered connections that hadn't been apparent before, relationships and associations that linked several people in the community to each other and, potentially, to Brianna. One of the names that kept surfacing belonged to a local man with a troubled history. He had a criminal record. He was known to be violent, and several witnesses placed him in the vicinity of the Black Lantern Inn on the night Brianna disappeared. When investigators looked more closely at his alibi for that night, they found inconsistencies. He had initially claimed to be at home, but phone records and witness statements suggested he had been elsewhere. But before investigators could build a solid case against this man, something else emerged, something that complicated everything. Another source came forward claiming that the first woman's story was fabricated, that she had made up the entire account to implicate people she had personal grudges against. This source provided their own theory of what had happened to Brianna, a theory that pointed in an entirely different direction. Who was telling the truth? Were both sources lying, each for their own reasons? Or was the truth somehow a combination of both stories, mixed together in ways that made it impossible to separate fact from fiction? The investigation stalled. Prosecutors reviewed the evidence and concluded that, while there were strong suspicions about certain individuals, there wasn't enough concrete proof to bring charges. You cannot convict someone of a crime based on rumors and contradictory witness statements. You cannot send someone to prison because you have a gut feeling they're guilty. The justice system requires evidence, and the evidence in Brianna's case remained frustratingly circumstantial. For the Maitland family, this was devastating. They had allowed themselves to hope that an arrest was imminent, that they would finally get answers, that the people responsible for taking their daughter would be held accountable. Instead, they watched as the investigation ground to a halt, as the media coverage faded, as the world began to move on. But they refused to move on. They couldn't. How can a parent move on when their child is missing, when they don't know if she's alive or dead, when they can't even give her a proper burial? The ambiguity is a special kind of torture. At least when someone dies and you have a body, you can grieve, you can find some form of closure, you can begin the long and painful process of healing. But when someone simply vanishes, when they're there one day and gone the next with no explanation, you exist in a kind of purgatory. You can't stop hoping they'll come home, even when logic tells you that hope is futile. Years passed. The case went cold, then lukewarm, then cold again. New investigators were assigned, brought fresh eyes to the evidence, conducted new interviews. Some of the original persons of interest died or moved away. Witnesses who might have known something took their secrets to the grave. And through it all, that photograph persisted. Brianna's car, backed into the abandoned farmhouse, became an icon of unresolved tragedy. It circulated on true crime websites and discussion forums. People who had never been to Vermont, who had never heard of Montgomery, became obsessed with the image, with the questions it raised, with the girl who had disappeared into the darkness. Kelly Maitland is not a woman who gives up. In the years since her daughter disappeared, she has become an advocate, a detective, and a living memorial all rolled into one. She has devoted her life to finding answers, to keeping Brianna's case in the public consciousness, to making sure that the world never forgets what happened on Route 118. I spoke with people who have interacted with Kelly over the years, and they all describe the same thing: a mother's love that has transformed into something fierce and unbreakable. She has organized vigils and awareness events. She has worked with law enforcement, sometimes cooperating and sometimes pushing back when she felt the investigation wasn't moving quickly enough. She has reached out to other families of missing persons, offering support and solidarity, to people who understand her pain in a way that no one else can. "You become part of a club that no one wants to join," she once said. The parents of the missing. "We find each other because no one else really gets it. Other people try to understand, and they mean well, but they can't. They go home to their children at night. They tuck them into bed. They know where they are. We don't. We never will. Not until we get answers." Kelly has been critical of some aspects of the investigation, particularly the early hours when she feels more should have been done. She questions why the car sat at the farmhouse for so long before anyone investigated. She wonders what evidence might have been lost, what tracks might have been covered, what witnesses might have forgotten or been silenced during those crucial first days. These are questions that haunt any investigation, but they cut especially deep when you're the one waiting for news about your child. But Kelly is not bitter, or rather, she doesn't let the bitterness consume her. She channels it into action. She has worked with legislators to improve procedures for handling missing persons cases. She has shared her story with media outlets across the country, using each interview as an opportunity to remind the public that Brianna deserves justice. And she has never stopped believing that the truth will eventually come out. "Someone knows what happened to my daughter," she has said repeatedly. "Someone has carried that secret for all these years." And secrets have a way of coming out. People talk. People confess on their deathbeds. People can't live with the guilt forever. I believe that one day, the right person will say the right thing to the right person, and we'll finally know. This belief has sustained her through 2 decades of anguish. It's a remarkable kind of faith, not religious necessarily, but faith in the basic human need for truth, for confession, for unburdening. Kelly believes in the conscience, in the idea that even the most hardened criminal eventually needs to tell someone what they've done. The police, too, have never officially closed the case. It remains open and active, even though active is a relative term. Investigators still follow up on tips that come in. They still review the evidence periodically, hoping that new forensic techniques or new analytical tools might reveal something that was missed before. They still believe, or at least they claim to believe, that the case is solvable. In recent years, there have been renewed efforts to bring attention to Brianna's disappearance. Podcasts have featured her case. Television programs have devoted episodes to exploring the mystery. Social media has given rise to a new generation of amateur investigators who pore over the available evidence, generating theories and occasionally uncovering information that was previously unknown. Some of these efforts have been helpful. Some have been less so. The danger of amateur investigation is that it can sometimes interfere with official police work, can spread misinformation, can traumatize the families who are already suffering. Kelly Maitland has navigated this landscape carefully, appreciating the attention while sometimes wishing that people would respect the boundaries of what should and shouldn't be discussed publicly. 20 years. 2 decades have passed since Brianna Maitland finished her shift at the Black Lantern Inn and drove into the night. 20 years of birthdays she didn't celebrate. 20 years of holidays her family. I've taken you through the darkness of this story, through the uncertainty and the fear and the endless frustration of a case that refuses to be solved. Now let me offer you something else. Hope. Not blind optimism, not naive faith that everything will work out, but genuine, hard-won hope based on what I've seen in cases like this one. Brianna Maitland's case is not over. It will never be over, not until she's found, not until her family knows the truth. And in the 2 decades since her disappearance, the world has changed in ways that offer real reasons for hope. Forensic science has advanced dramatically. DNA analysis that was impossible in 2004 is routine now. Evidence that seemed useless 20 years ago might tell a story today if it's been preserved properly. Investigators have new tools, new techniques, new ways of seeing what was invisible before. Social media has transformed how we share information. Brianna's photograph, her story, her face. They can reach millions of people in ways that weren't possible in 2004. Every share, every like, every comment extends her reach, increases the chances that the right person will see her story and feel compelled to speak up. Cold cases are being solved at an unprecedented rate. The genetic genealogy techniques that have cracked cases like the Golden State Killer have opened new possibilities for all kinds of investigations. I'm not saying those techniques will necessarily apply here, but they represent a broader truth. We haven't stopped trying, we haven't stopped innovating, we haven't stopped caring about the victims of unsolved crimes. And then there's this, the weight of secrets. I've seen it happen. I've seen cases where someone carried a secret for decades and finally unburdened themselves. Sometimes it's guilt that drives them. Sometimes it's religion, a deathbed confession, a need to make peace with their creator before they die. Sometimes it's a falling out among conspirators, a betrayal that leads someone to talk as revenge. 20 years is a long time to carry a secret as heavy as this one. The people who know what happened to Brianna Maitland have had to live with that knowledge every single day. They've had to look in the mirror and see someone who participated in or covered up something terrible. They've had to wonder, every time they heard a police siren or saw a news report about the case, whether this was the day their secret would be exposed. That kind of pressure wears on a person. It changes them. And eventually, for many people, it becomes unbearable. I believe that someone out there is reaching that breaking point. Someone is lying awake at night, tortured by what they know, desperate to unload the burden. They just need a reason, a permission, a sign that it's safe to talk. Maybe this video is that sign. If you're watching this and you know something about Brianna Maitland's disappearance, I want you to hear me clearly. It's not too late. It's never too late to do the right thing. Brianna's family deserves to know what happened to their daughter. You can be the person who finally gives them that gift. The Vermont State Police Major Crime Unit still investigates this case. Tips can be submitted anonymously. You don't have to be brave. You don't have to use your real name. You just have to speak up. And if you're watching this and you don't know anything about Brianna's case, but you've been moved by her story, there are still things you can do. Share this video. Tell people about her. Keep her name alive. Because as long as people remember Brianna Maitland, as long as people are still looking for her, as long as people still care, there's hope. Brianna was 17 years old when she disappeared. She would be in her late 30s now, had she lived. She might have children of her own. She might have become an artist, a writer, a teacher, anything she wanted. We'll never know who she could have become, and that's a tragedy that can never be undone. But we can still give her justice. We can still give her family answers. We can still honor her memory by refusing to let her story be forgotten. Somewhere out there, in the hills of Vermont or anywhere in the world, the truth is waiting to be told. And I truly believe, that one day it will be. This is not the end of Brianna's story. It's a pause, a moment of waiting, a held breath before the next chapter begins. And when that chapter is finally written, when the truth finally emerges into the light, it will be because people like you refuse to look away, refuse to give up, refuse to let a 17-year-old girl be erased from history. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Thank you for caring about Brianna. Thank you for being part of the community of people who believe that every missing person deserves to be found, every victim deserves justice, every family deserves the truth. Now go. Share this story. Subscribe so you'll be here for the next one. And if you know something, anything at all, make the call. Be the reason this nightmare finally ends. For Brianna, for her family, for all of us. The investigation into Brianna Maitland's disappearance remains open and active. Anyone with information is encouraged to contact the Vermont State Police.